and we will go straight to the Republican candidate for Attorney General of New York, Michael Henry. Thank you so much for coming on tonight. How are you doing the night before the election? Introduce yourself to our audience and tell us how the campaign momentum is going so far.
Sure. First off, thank you for having me. I'm doing very well, cautiously optimistic. I was actually just in Queens, in Little Guyana, not too long ago. So to your audience that might not be familiar, I am a Queens resident myself. I am an attorney in private practice who, prior to being in private practice, I was in the mortgage industry, was in management, eventually went back to law school at night, opened my own law firm. I've also done religious asylum work for people that are being persecuted, mainly in Asia, and help them gain status here in the United States. And for me, private citizen that's just been very frustrated with the crime crisis, the corruption crisis, the cost of living crisis. And what I've seen in this office in particular was that it's utilized for one of two reasons. The first one is to become the next governor. The second one is to weaponize against opponents. So I've decided to run to be able to professionalize an office and make it work for the taxpayers of New York, regardless of whether they're Republican, Independent, or Democrat. I want this office to be responsive to the needs of the people and coordinated. And as far as this issue recently, I felt the need to stand up because this was not only inaccurate information that was provided by the Attorney General of the state of New York. She was bullying and threatened to bully a foreign government on an issue that she clearly was not familiar with. And on top of that, she was causing what I felt was racial division. And she was trying to paint Indo-Guyanese as acting as racist. And I felt that what she did was irresponsible, which is a pattern with her. And I wanted to reach out to this community because this is a tough election. And the Indo-Guyanese community specifically has the ability to make their voices heard and let people know that this kind of behavior is not going to be tolerated.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Henry. Now, so you condemned James's statement. You campaigned in Little Guyana over the weekend. You're coming on our tour tonight. You were in Little Guyana again today. What is your message to the Guyanese audience, in particular, Guyanese American audience, and how do you think your outreach has been received so far?
Sure. Look, everyone knows Rickford Burke is wanted in Guyana. He's been accused of terrorism. He's been accused of racism and much more. And for her to call him a brother from another mother and threaten to use her power against the Guyanese government, well, I'm going to tell you something. Threats of political violence are intolerable, and especially when you're bringing them to the shores of New York. He has threatened to shut down businesses. He has threatened to attack people's homes here in New York. And I promise this community, when I'm the Attorney General of this state, I am going to ensure that the Indo-Guyanese community specifically is not going to have to live in fear of threats from somebody who clearly does not understand how the rule of law works.
So on that specific issue, so Democrats in recent times in the U.S. have campaigned on standing against racism, standing against political violence in terms of January 6th and President Trump and refusal to accept election results. However, in this election right now, Letitia James, the current Democrat incumbent, has been associated with, as she called him, a brother from another mother, a man who notably supports racial violence, supports political violence, and supports rejecting the results of free and fair election. What do you think that says about the blatant hypocrisy of her position?
Right, she's advancing election denialism. The truth of the matter is this: the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, the European Union, multiple Afro-Caribbean nations stood by the results of this election. And after the 5-month attempted coup, everybody, for the most part, accepted the results and said this was a free and fair election. So for her to push this election denialism and talk about a subject that she, one, either didn't know what she was talking about, or secondly, talked about and misled everybody on what the facts were, was completely irresponsible. And what she also did is she tried to brandish the government and the Guyanese government as racist. She was trying to paint a picture of this horrible racism that's being inflicted on Afro-Guyanese. And what she did was she created a racial divide. We should not be creating racial divides. We should be working to unite communities and make people united. I live in Queens. There's a huge Indo-Guyanese community in Queens. We all live side by side when we come to this country, no matter what our background is. And that's the beauty of America. And for her to engage in this kind of divisive politics, number one, is disgusting. And then secondly, she once again proves she's pro-criminal, because anybody who could be proud to be associated with an individual like Rickford Burke should be ashamed of themselves and is not worthy of political office, let alone to be the state's chief law enforcement officer.
Yeah, so on the issue of standing against racism, so for various reasons, be it the immigration issue or how they perceive rhetoric on immigration or race, Guyanese or and other immigrant groups as well, despite being largely socially conservative, they have tended to vote for the Democrats over the Republicans, even though
Right.
I'll just speak on behalf of the Guyanese community. They love their faith, they love their family, they love freedom, they love America and the American dream, especially having come here in the face of leaving the lack of freedom, opportunity, and in their own country, and coming here at that point in time. Now, what is your message to certain voters who, their hand may quiver as they switch from
Sure.
voting from Democrat to Republican for what may be the first time for many of them, and
Sure.
what would you say to
Look.
alleviate their concerns on certain issues, be it
Right.
immigration or whatnot?
Right. First off, I'm looking to represent all New Yorkers, regardless of party affiliation, racial, gender, ethnic backgrounds, religious affiliation. I come from a family where my father had relatives who came here from Italy and changed their name to sound more American because of discrimination. So I understand that. I've done asylum work for people from China who've been persecuted for being Christian and Catholic. I've done asylum cases for people from countries like Liberia who've been persecuted for political reasons. I've done cases for women who've been victims of female genital mutilation in West Africa. So for me, I am welcoming of different communities, and I want to represent these communities. And nobody should be nervous of the fact that I'm a Republican. They should be embracing the fact that you're going to have a Republican that's going to fight to keep your community safe, that's going to stand by you as people are threatening political violence against you. And I'm going to work to make sure there's a cost of living so that small businesses could flourish and people could live in this city and live a good life or live in this state and not have to worry about their relatives looking to move out of the state because they can't afford to live here.
Yeah, and just to be clear to our audience, this is not about one's views on maybe former President Trump or the Republicans or Democrats in general. This is about a
Right.
particular election in New York on the ballot tomorrow, and the particular candidates Letitia James and Michael Henry. Now, to move on to what is I think the biggest issue affecting this race right now, crime. I mean, Guyanese Americans,
Sure.
all New Yorkers are seeing this rapid rise in crime and seeing how Letitia James is responding or failing to respond to this issue. After your rally on Saturday, I went down across Little Guyana, and I heard from small business owner after small business owner their fear of theft and robbery, and nobody being held accountable. And we saw in the Little Guyana community, even the Little Guyana street sign was stolen. So this is a crime like we haven't seen in a very long time. What would you say to
Right.
voters concerned about crime right now?
Sure, you're going to have an attorney general that's going to fight for victims' rights and not criminals' rights, and we need to have people held accountable. The first thing I would do as the attorney general is I would reach out to all 62 district attorneys in this state and see if they have the resources they need to be able to fight crime. I would restructure some of the agencies at the office. I'm also going to push program bills into the legislature that make positive changes to the criminal justice system. The other thing I would say is I'm going to use the bully pulpit to push for the full repeal of cashless bail. This law is not what it was presented as to the public. This was presented for nonviolent first-time offenders. There are very violent crimes that are eligible under this law. This law does not make criminals accountable. I would push for the full repeal and encourage the legislature to put something in place for nonviolent offenders that we want to keep out of the system. And then I would also push for the full repeal of less is more, which is the parole bill, where parolees are being allowed to commit crimes while they're on parole, which that's the time they're still completing their sentence, and then they're not being remanded back to prison. They're being allowed to just keep staying on the streets. And then lastly, we need to we need to amend raise the age, because this has led to a rash of teenage shootings, and gangs are starting to use teenagers to commit violent crimes because they know they're going to go to family court instead of state court. So crime is an issue I'm going to address seriously. The law-abiding citizens of this city and of this state should not be living in fear. It should be the criminals who are thinking about doing something wrong. They should be living in fear that they're going to be held accountable for their actions, and currently they are not. And there's not a bigger contrast between me and Letitia James. In 2018, she campaigned on cashless bail. She got what she wanted, and it failed. She recently said she needs more data before she'd revisit any changes to cashless bail. And that is a despicable mindset, because more data means more victims. And we saw it when I'm walking through Little Guyana the other day. Store owners telling me they've been robbed. Someone telling me his two friends got mugged walking out of a bar. I hear these stories in every single community I go to. And as the Attorney General, I'm not going to tolerate this behavior. And I'm going to work hard to get this crime crisis under control, because it is intolerable and it needs to stop.
And moving on to another issue that has affected a lot of New Yorkers and a lot of Guyanese who have the mindset of becoming entrepreneurs one day. Small-time landlords have been frankly rolled over by the Democrat policies
Yes.
of Andrew Cuomo, continued under Kathy Hochul. What would you do
Right.
to help mitigate the disastrous policies of the past few years that, for those who don't know, have led to countless tenants just not paying rent for months on end and in some cases years on end?
There's limits to what I would do, but there is a big contrast between me and Letitia James. She actually supports good cause eviction. That is a horrible bill because what we have right now is a tenant court system. It's not landlord tenant, it's tenant court. And we have a system where there's people who own two-family homes. They need that second unit to pay for their rent and their mortgage or their mortgages and their taxes. And what happens is when these individuals, and in many instances, these people could afford to pay the rent, they're just gaming the system. What happens is the individual who's not being paid rent has to wait years at sometimes. It could be a year and a half before you finally get some kind of adjudication in court or even get a hearing in court by the time it gets to a judge. Meanwhile, for a year and a half, you have been paying your taxes and your mortgage because that doesn't stop. And you're in financial duress. So I would publicly advocate against that bill. I would publicly advocate for better policies and even push policies through the state legislature because what is going on right now is basically criminal in the system where how tenants are taking advantage of landlords and it's wrong. And I don't understand why Letitia James or any of the other people associated with this would support that type of bill because it makes it nearly impossible to evict a bad tenant. And what you're doing is once again rewarding bad behavior and you are financially crippling hardworking people who don't deserve it.
So we've taken up about 15 minutes of your time. I know it's the night before the election, so I'll just ask you one more question before a closing remark from you. So you've reached out to the Guyanese community. I think I speak on behalf of a lot of people when I say that we really appreciate it. How do we make sure that this is something that goes beyond election day? That this isn't just a rarity that we've seen a Republican candidate, leading Republican like you come out to us. I mean, in recent years, we saw the Trump administration did try reach out under Mike Pompeo after the 2020 election. Pompeo did a historic visit to Guyana. I know a lot of Guyanese don't vote Republican right now, but they love Ronald Reagan from 1986 and the Reagan amnesty that benefited a lot of them. How do you make sure that you're not the last Republican they see, and how do you make sure you in particular are continuing this relationship beyond election day, that Attorney General Michael Henry is seen in the Guyanese community and maybe even one day in Guyana? Who knows?
Listen, I would love to go to Guyana. I hear that the development that's going on there is phenomenal and there's a lot of growth in the country. So I would love to take a trip there. What I could say is, look, I'm not going to give you the typical political answer. What I'm going to ask the community is to put their trust in me and give me a vote. And I promise you that in 4 years, you'll be voting for me again because I will do the right thing by the community. And I'm someone that believes, I can only speak for myself, but I am someone that believes we need a much more diverse Republican Party. We need a Republican Party that looks like the state of New York, not just upstate New York. And how do we do that? We get into communities like the Guyanese community and we start recruiting people into the party and making them feel welcome and making them feel like we have a future, because then we can start recruiting candidates at the local level and everyone has more representation. So what I would say is I would ask humbly for your trust. You give me this, you vote for me tomorrow, and I guarantee you in 4 years you're going to be proud to vote for me again. And I will be around because, for one, I live in Queens, so I'm not too far from the communities. Most of the communities down here, whether it's the Bronx or Queens or Long Island. And like I said, I look forward to building this relationship further and eventually taking a trip to Guyana.
Well, election tomorrow, it seems like there's a red wave nationwide and the crime concern, New York is closer than it's been in 20 years. The Guyanese community, second largest immigrant group in Queens, fifth largest in New York City. They have the potential to be a game changer if they get on vote tomorrow.
One thing
Yes,
I want to say in closing, not just with crime. I will not tolerate threats of political violence against this community. If you're going to make threats of political violence against this community, you're going to be held accountable. It's not going to be tolerated.
yes, we fully agree with you there. I can say for one that I think your outreach to the community has been quite remarkable. We wish you all the best tomorrow on the campaign trail, and as election night the results come in. Do you have any final closing remarks that you want to say?
No, I just would like to thank the community for embracing me and seeing that I'm in this fight with them. And I really appreciate the openness and the welcoming the welcome that I've received in the community. And I look forward to building this relationship moving forward.
All right. Thank you so much, Michael Henry, Republican candidate for New York Attorney General.
Thank you very much for having me.